have a quorum.
Okay, would you
that's how it
would you please state the voting members, please?
Yes, sir. I'll just do a quick roll call. Mr. Brennan? Ms. Teresa? Okay, I'm
Here.
sorry. Mr. Brennan, was that you?
Yeah, present.
Thank you. Ms. Teresa?
Here.
Mr. Overture Walker? Mr. Fergus?
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Gleason? Representative Howard? Chairman Huggins?
Here.
Mr. Lawson?
Here.
Ms. Mood?
Here.
Dr. Morris?
Present.
Mr. Smith? Mr. Andy Smith? Okay, the voting members who are present are Mr. Brennan, Ms. Teresa, Mr. Fergus, Chairman Huggins, Mr. Lawson, Ms. Mood, and Dr. Morris at this point.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'd like to call the advisory members. Mr. Jenkins,
I'm here.
Ms. Summers, Mr. Green, Mr. Mike Green,
Sorry, I had on mute. I'm here.
okay, thank you. Ms. Geraldine Robinson? Ms. Robinson? I know I saw her come on earlier. Mr. Unsay?
Diane Sumter. Diane Sumter.
Mr. Coon?
Present.
Mr. Barry Walker? Mr. Stephen Kane? Mr. Chair, I'd like to call, Ms. Carolyn Gleaton just came on, and so did Andy Smith.
Very good. Thank you.
Pam, I'm here
All
too.
right.
Geraldine Robinson.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson.
Okay. All right. That brings us to item number 2, adoption of agenda. Is there a motion?
I so moved.
Is
Second.
there a second? It's been moved in second. Ms. Bonner-Reed, please call the roll.
Okay. Mr. Brennan?
Yes.
Ms. Teresa?
Yes.
Mr. Overture Walker? Mr. Fergus?
Yes.
Ms. Gleason? Ms. Gleason?
Yes. Yes.
Representative Howard, thank you. Mr. Huggins?
Yes.
Mr. Lawson?
Yes.
Ms. Mood?
Yes.
Dr. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Very good. That brings us to item number 3, Midlands Transit update. Limit the responses or questions to 2 minutes. Do we have a representative?
No, sir, we do not.
Okay, that brings us to item number 4, call to the public. Anyone just wanting to speak from the public? Ms. Bonner-Reed, anybody signed up?
No, sir, we have not had notification from the public.
Okay, that brings us to a consent calendar, consent agenda. Is there a motion to move forward with the consent agenda?
I so moved.
Is there a second? It's been moved in second. Any discussion? Ms. Reed, will you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mr. Brennan?
Leon Howard.
Yes.
Join the meeting.
Ms. Teresa?
Yes.
Mr. Fergus? Mr. Overture Walker? Mr. Fergus?
Yes.
Ms. Gleason?
Yes.
Representative Howard?
What is this, roll call or something?
No, it's a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Oh, okay.
And I have you down on roll.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Huggins,
Yes.
Mr. Lawson,
Yes.
Ms. Mood,
Yes.
Dr. Morris,
Yes.
and Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. That brings us to action items. Before I turn it over to Mr. DeShantz and Mr. Harris, I do want to thank them for their time putting this presentation together. We have asked that the presenters give us around a 25-minute presentation so we can Q&A. And it is our, as we move forward to get a vote on productivity and coverage, I would like for Ms. Mood and Mr. Fergus to weigh in after the presentation and give us some guidance based on their service standard agenda. With that being said, Mr. Harris, will you please, Mr. DeShantz, please move forward.
First off, thank you to the members of the board. We have Scudder and Ricky, I believe Ricky's on the line, prepared to reiterate some of the things that were discussed in last month's board meeting. They also, they're open to answer any questions you may have in hopes that we will receive a vote from each board member for final recommendation. And with that being said, I yield the floor to Scudder Wag from Jared Walker and Associates.
Thanks, Eric. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. We've presented previously to you all the ridership concept and the coverage concept, and I will just bring those up again for your ability to refresh your memories on those proposals. The coverage concept, very importantly, being the network that is as close as possible to providing coverage of every place and every neighborhood and every commercial area that is currently served by today's network, but trying to do so in as efficient a way as we can and provide a relatively consistent service level in terms of the frequency of service to those places. It doesn't serve everyone exactly the same way, but it tries to do so as best we can in a consistent way across the region. And in this concept, about 50% of your resources are going to high ridership goals and about 50% going to high coverage goals. So if you refer back to the memorandum we sent in March, if your preference is to try to maintain coverage of every place that has it today, then I would encourage you to say to us, split the resources 50-50. So fill in the blanks in that policy resolution with 50% ridership, 50% coverage, or close to that. If you want us to hew close to that, you could say perhaps 60-40 should be the split, 60% ridership and 40% coverage, for example. If that were your if that was your recommendation to us, then we would design something relatively close to this map of this concept, but perhaps with a little bit less coverage and a little bit of an increase in frequency on one or two corridors. The ridership map, the ridership concept, it tries to maximize how many people are riding transit by putting frequent service in the busiest, densest places, which means we don't go everywhere that you go today, which means some people just do not have service anymore. And that is obviously a very, very hard decision to make, but it is a decision that some people might feel is really important. And so if you all feel strongly that we ought to, that the Comet should go more in that direction, then this ridership concept is 80% ridership goals and 20% coverage goals. So that policy resolution, if you wanted us to go in the direction of high ridership, then you should choose a number that is 70% or 80% ridership orientation and 20% or 30% coverage orientation in that policy resolution. So We've presented on these a couple of times, and you all have our full report. So I just wanted to make sure that we could clarify the desire today is to get those percentage numbers you want to apply to the ridership goals and percentage to apply to the coverage goals. With, of course, those two numbers need to add up to 100% at the end of the day. So with that, I think primarily I want to answer questions and help you all have a clear discussion about how to prioritize these goals.
Okay, at this time, I'm gonna ask Ms. Mood and Mr. Fergus to give some insight on what their thoughts are, since they are on the service committee, and also all other members that may have some thoughts. But I'm asking Ms. Mood and Mr. Fergus to lead us in conversation. Ms. Mood, please.
Well, after the service committee heard the full report from our consultants, I think we were most interested in the kinds of well, what if, how in fact would we fulfill our responsibilities as a tax-funded organization in terms of serving all of the needs of our population? And also, how would we use our funds most efficiently, which would give the most people the most rides to the places that they need to go? And so we recognize that what we're asking of the board today is for each of us to consider in our own minds what we want to accomplish with a public transit system and what would serve our community most effectively. It was helpful to me, Mr. Waggy, when you talked a little bit about what those kinds of elements of that are, like the proximity. Are you choosing a longer walk or a longer wait? And I wondered if it might help the rest of the board to just hear a quick review of those major concepts that contribute to each one of these models. But I'm stopping short of saying, please do that. I would like to hear from Mr. Fergus and any of the other board members on whether they'd like to hear a little more about that. We deliberately in the service committee did not take a straw poll or a vote on what our preferences were in percentages, to leave it as open as possible for the board to discuss this fully and come to a conclusion. So I could share my views with you, but it wouldn't be the views of the service committee. I think I'll just stop with that.
Mr. Fergus.
Yes, I was looking at that 80-20 concept, and just based on, we have 4 routes on the circuit now that goes into every area where all our riders are, just 4 routes. So to reduce below, coverage below 80% will be a hard sell to go to the public and say, vote for this penny while we're reducing your coverage service. So that 80%, is as a starting point, it can be adjusted at any time during the process, but we are top heavy with 4 routes. So that's our coverage all through the inner city, those 4 routes. So anything else that reduces it from 100% are those routes that connect with those other 4 routes. So that's just my thought with it.
Give me the route numbers that you're making. Is 101? What's the numbers?
101, 501, 801, and 61 basically cover the entire Richland County area that we go to, other than the little tributaries that we run off those routes. So
okay,
so
very good.
And to be clear, the ridership concept effectively maintains service on those major corridors that where you see most of your ridership today in the city of Columbia and adjacent suburban areas. What it does is it cuts back on some of the less frequent routes kind of in between on the less used corridors or on some of the outer corridors. So for example, this coverage concept, it includes a number of routes that go far out Farrow Road all the way to Killian, like you do in many today. It includes routes all the way out Two Notch to the village at Sandhill, like you do today, at similar frequency that you do today. So hourly service out to the villages at Sandhill, for example, in this coverage concept. The ridership concept keeps the service more in the core of the city, and it increases the frequency on some of it. So on Two Notch, you have 15-minute frequency out to Columbia Place Mall in that concept, but it does not have some of the in-between routes. So today you have, for example, in this coverage concept, you have a version of the 12 that's kind of in between Farrow and Two Notch. That doesn't exist in the ridership concept. And because you're investing more in frequency on the busier, denser corridors like Two Notch and Farrow. So that's the trade-off. And I certainly can understand how people might feel it's unfair to say, cut back on coverage if you're asking people in the long term to, maintain your penny tax to provide service. The desire to provide service to every part of a community, every neighborhood, every city or town that your your tax covers is absolutely a key reason people want coverage. And emphasizing ridership, emphasizing frequency is a really tough choice when you're in a limited budget, and to do so you have to cut coverage. So that's why this is a tough value choice.
All right, but I didn't get your name again, Mr. Swag.
My first name is Scudder. Last name is Wag.
Wag.
W-A-G-G.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, now just that example you gave, for some
Mhm.
reason you mentioned 12.
Yes.
If you eliminate Route 12, you cut off several communities in the inner city of Columbia. I mean, several of them. You take them away from any decent walking distance, even to catch a bus. And you don't put them on the circuit or the 501, the 801. And so that's what you really have to be careful with. That's an inner city route, but that even happens to be one of the board members live on that route too, uses that bus.
So yeah, there are some areas even within the inner city that in the ridership concept are a really long walk from service. Absolutely, which is again another reason people may prefer focusing more on coverage.
Okay, I have my my thoughts, and I want to start off with, and I'm going to ask Mr. Harris. I need Mr. Harris, our planner, to weigh in also, based on the history of our ridership. Mr. Fergus and Ms. Gleason have used the buses more than any other board member, I would think, and know who the constituents are that are using the board members. But my thoughts are exactly what Mr. Wag has already indicated, that I will have a problem asking people to support the penny campaign when we have basically reduced the coverage or frequency in our areas across the county. And I'm very respectful of that, and sensitive of that, rather. And I don't want to be in a situation where we're asking for someone to vote for something and they're not really represented based on the tax. So that's my thoughts. And Mr. Harris, can you expound on just how we could do coverage and increase ridership, and your thoughts on the 101, 501, 801, 6112, how we can increase ridership frequency, but then at the same time have a balance of coverage, and what does that really mean to the system, the vision of the system based on coverage?
Absolutely. So that goes back to some of the projects we've been exploring over the past few months, where we're looking at micro transit that can travel into different corridors. You've seen one of our response to COVID-19, where we have on-demand routes in certain areas. So it kind of alleviates some of the pressure of how many riders are utilizing, the bus, at given points of the day, and it kind of puts out a bus that just addresses the demand for those rural areas. So we can balance out those areas in the coverage concept, and equally to Scudder's point, and also to you, Chairman Huggins. In the coverage concept, you are looking at more of a 50-50 split, and it's more conducive to what we are operating today. And if anything, it definitely addresses the current community needs. And we've already reached out to the planners across our service areas and local municipalities. And these are some of the areas that we felt like, just even from looking at long-term growth and currently where we are and where we feel like our community needs routes the most. This is the two concepts that were drawn up as a result of that conversation. So hopefully I answered your question well, but just looking at it for what it's worth, again, the coverage concept would be more reflective of our current board and our community stakeholders.
Okay, and based on that coverage percentage, what is that coverage percentage right now?
We're more so in the 50-50 range.
Okay.
That would be the most accurate way of answering that question. So we're definitely there right now as we stand.
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Are you saying to us that 50% of our riders have a long distance to walk to get transit, and that we are operating now at 50% coverage of the routes?
No, so there are some slight differences with what you're seeing on your screen.
No, I'm not looking at the screen. I'm asking about actual bus service in Richland County. You're saying we operating at 50% coverage right now?
Yes, we're closer to the 50-50 standpoint as it stands. The purpose of
Sorry, Eric. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I apologize for interrupting. You go ahead.
No, go ahead, Scudder.
I was just trying to clarify as best I can the coverage concept where 50% of your resources or your dollars that you're spending on transit are going to coverage goals versus 50% going towards ridership goals is closest to the current split in how you're spending your resources. And I want to be very clear that what we mean by that is about 50% of your resources are being spent on routes that are going to relatively low density places at relatively low frequency of service, and going to the places where we know you probably are not going to get many riders relative to your cost of service, but you're going to those places because you feel it's important for other goals, like getting to people who otherwise wouldn't have any other option, even if there aren't many of them.
Mr. Webb.
Yes.
My question was on ridership and coverage, and wasn't on expenses, but I'm getting an answer on COMET funds. So we started out with 50% coverage. We weren't talking about finance. If we're talking about finance, that's a different discussion.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I think this is really a key issue, because I think I hear Mr. Fergus thinking that we're talking about 50% of the area is reached, but Mr. Wagg's clarification, Mr. Fergus, is that this is not talking about, I mean, the maps will show us where the routes go, but the percentages really are how much of our budget are we going to invest in services that reach every part of our service area where we are including areas where we are not likely to get many riders, and what percentage of our dollars are going to go into routes that will have a high volume of riders in a more concentrated area. So it's so easy to get these two concepts confused in terms of the percentages, but it's not how much of the area are we reaching with those percentages. It's how much of the funds are we invested in that concept. I don't know if that makes it any clearer or not.
Yes, it does, but how does that concept fit with federal funding? We are federally funded, not based on how many folks we get in that area, how much money we splitting one way or the other. We're federally funded just to put service in that area. We are not to be shooting toward profitability. So I don't understand the concept.
So
What is our goal?
your federal, so there's important clarification about your federal funding. There's two main streams of your federal funding. One of them is based on service to rural areas. And in both of these concepts, we have very carefully ensured that you maintain a level of service in the rural portions of your region to ensure that you use all of the resources that you get federally to provide service in the rural areas. And then the majority of your federal funding is coming in for your service under 5307 program to provide service in the urbanized area of the region. And that funding stream is really coming in based on a formula that the federal government uses to define based on overall your population plus and part on how many service hours you're running, period. And that formula wouldn't change dramatically either way. Between what you decide to do with these concepts, it might change a little bit if you went with the higher ridership concept, because one part of the formula does count your ridership as one factor in that formula. But it is one of many factors that gets counted in that formula for federal funding.
Let me ask any other board members if they have any questions. Would you, any other board members have any questions?
Mr. Chair, may I?
Yes.
This is kind of a big conceptual question that I hope is appropriate right now. So if we were to shift in one direction or the other, in particular, if we were to shift more towards an emphasis on ridership, clearly there would be, for lack of a better phrase, winners and losers when it comes to routes. Some routes are going to have more service, some routes and more frequent service, and some routes are going to have less service or less emphasis, I should say, maybe. What's the criteria? What would then be the criteria for ranking those adjustments? So, it's one thing for me to, in concept, approve a shift in percentages one way or the other. It's another for me to say this particular route is now no longer going to have X service, while this one's going to go up to Y or whatever. And frankly, I'm not the best person to make those decisions, because I'm not, I'm on the finance committee. That's more my focus. But whatever we do in that regard, I think it would have to be very carefully done with a keen eye to equity and all the things that we care about as a transit authority.
So if you all were to say to us that you did want to turn this dial, you can think of this like a dial of, emphasizing higher ridership or emphasizing higher coverage. And if you said you wanted to turn that dial in the direction of higher ridership and higher frequency at the expense of coverage, my answer to you is we would use the factors we've identified in the choices report, like density of population and jobs, density of low-income population, walkability of different parts of the community, and the existing productivity of your current services to guide where you would invest in more frequency or across the region, and places where those things are low density, low walkability, your current services have low productivity, are the places where you would cut back on service or eliminate service entirely, potentially. In an 80-20 high ridership concept, there are places that you just eliminate service, which obviously is a very hard choice to make. We, as technical experts, we can show you where those things make sense, and that this is why the ridership concept is the way it is. We have put the frequency in the places on the corridors where it would make the most sense if that is the goal you wanted to try to go after, as a way of showing you, for lack of a better term, who are the winners and the losers in that, and if that were your goal. And I hope it's coming across here, that emphasizing that because this is ultimately a value choice about what goals you want to prioritize. I'm not here to tell you which way you should go on this decision. I'm here to just help you understand the trade-offs and the potential outcomes.
Point well made. Mr. Smith, any more questions from you? I want to hear from all advisory and board members also. So, Mr. Smith, any other questions for you?
Real quick follow-up for Eric. So in the areas where, if we were, again, to go towards a more ridership emphasis, and there were quote unquote routes that would lose, I don't want to say loser, but you know what I mean, lose service or lose emphasis. There are other ways to reach those folks. And is that what I understood you to say, Eric, that there are other micro transit possibilities that we could pursue to make sure that if there's a handful of people that rely on that route, even though it's not a very, heavily emphasized route anymore, but there's still a handful of people that need that, there's a way for them to have transit.
Yes, there are ways to explore opportunities for alternative modes of transit.
Okay, thank you.
Any other board members?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, Robert Morris.
Go right ahead.
I would like for someone to tell us, and I guess it would be Mr. Wagg or Mr. Harris, if you eliminate some of these routes, what are you going to do for the passengers who are riding the bus but not at an amount that would be sufficient? So we need to come up with some type of strategy if we're going to cut routes in terms of how to meet the needs of those other passengers.
So I want to emphasize that the reason this is an incredibly hard choice, particularly if you want to go in a higher ridership direction, is that there are potentially some places that would just no longer have service, and you would not be serving, potentially some neighborhoods or some communities. It's not, the purpose of these concepts is to help you see what parts of your community you might not serve if you really wanted to go in a very high ridership direction. Again, you don't have to choose that direction. That is one set of goals to prioritize, and it may not be what you want to prioritize. But even with microtransit tools or on-demand tools, which can help to squeeze a bit more efficiency in places where you're trying to provide some coverage. If you were to tell us today that you wanted to do an 80% ridership, 20% coverage as your priority, I would probably come back to you with a map that says some areas you are serving today would not be served in the future. And you would not have an answer other than we aren't serving some of those areas anymore, which I know is an incredibly hard thing to say to folks. and it's not anything to be taken lightly. If you want, again, thinking about this like a dial, on a dashboard, if you do want to turn that dial very far in the ridership direction, do so with the clear understanding that that means some neighborhoods or some parts of your current service area would not have service in the future.
Hello?
Carolyn Gleason. I have a question. What are we going to do about our Oak Reed residents? These are senior citizens down there, make their doctor's appointments. They ride 12. Please, we cannot cut 12 out. Those people depend on that transportation, going to their doctor's appointments and doing their little shopping each month. It is very necessary. I watch it when I'm on that bus and going to doctor's appointment. Please do not cut 12 out.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your point, Ms. Gleason. Any other board members at this time that have not spoken? I'm going to come back to you, Mr. Fergus. But any other board members? I know we have a couple of board members that need to jump off the line. So any other board members have any question? I want to give you an opportunity to at least ask one question or two.
Mr. Chairman.
This is James Jenkins.
Okay.
I have a question. I heard him say low income, to cut low income. Well, low income is already down and you're taking away the service and stuff for them to even try to get better at their income and stuff. They're still human beings as well. I mean, you just can't concentrate on the high impact areas and stuff. You still got to bring the bottom up to try to bring them up to the middle or to the top with the rest. I mean, cutting service is not the way to fix it.
Understood, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Any other question?
Yes, this is Geraldine Robinson. My question is, how are you addressing the needs of the rural community? What impact would this concept have on them, especially the Eastover area?
Both of these concepts, both the ridership and the coverage concepts, do maintain service to Eastover in a similar fashion to today's service. And part of the reason for that is because service to Lower Richland is funded mostly through the rural portion of the federal funding that you all receive, and therefore is in a bit of a separate bucket from the rest of your service, which can be funded through urban FTA funding, federal funding.
Okay, thank you.
Hey,
Board
Mr.
members?
Chairman. Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is Chris Lawson. So I have a few questions for Mr. Wag. Hey, Mr. Wag, so specifically, I've thought about this in great detail the past few weeks. Do we have stats or any sort of numbers that show specifically the ridership decline or incline over the past 3 years?
Yes, we have information from the system at the system-wide level of how much ridership has increased or decreased. We have information by route, and Eric, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we do have information by route how much ridership has increased or decreased over the last few years. And then we do have snapshots of information about what has been the ridership at the stop level. We don't have as detailed trend data on that, but we do have some data.
So specifically, my question and what I'm getting at is, in your ridership model where you want to increase frequency in certain areas, I'm assuming you have used that data to say, hey, we want to increase, for instance, we want to increase ridership or we want to increase frequency with the ridership model, let's say downtown, because ridership has increased 10% over the past 3 years. And the reason that I say that is because if we're not using ridership inclines or declines to make those decisions with frequency, then we're doing a disservice to the model. Does that make sense?
I want to emphasize that whether ridership has increased or decreased isn't necessarily a really strong, over just the last 2 or 3 years, isn't necessarily a really strong indicator of the potential market for the likelihood that people will ride. What are really strong indicators are the land uses and the density of people and jobs along these corridors, and the existing level of ridership overall relative to cost, which we call productivity.
Okay.
And so those are the factors that we looked at in pretty close detail and are
Okay, so
summarized in the report.
I'm glad you said that. And so this is for the board. And then I'll wrap up by giving you guys my recommendation. So if based on what Mr. Wag just said, if ridership has not increased specifically in a certain area, then there is no need to increase frequency because we're not maximizing the ridership on the bus as it's currently constructed. Okay, so we just have to be simple and plain in our approach to what we're doing. If the numbers have not increased, the number of bodies have not increased in a specific area, then increasing the frequency in that area doesn't really make as much sense. And so my recommendation is that we do not go with the ridership model. We go with a coverage model, but we go with a 75-25 approach, being the areas, and we need data for this, but the areas that have declined in ridership over the past few years, we reduce frequency there and add frequency to the places on the map that have increased in ridership. That's all that I have. Thank you.
Point well taken, Mr. Lawson. Hold that, please, up as a form of possible motion. Is there any other questions? I know Mr. Terratio and I had a couple conversations over the last week about coverage and safety. Mr. Terratio, did you want to add anything?
I had a question for Mr. Harris, but I can hold it.
Okay, Ms. Terratio? Okay, please move forward, Mr. Fergus.
Yes, I want to agree with what Mr. Lawson stated, but I want Mr. Harris to explain to us, because he was kind of glib in what he said. If you cut out a route, what can the patrons do to get transportation? Because you didn't give an answer to that.
No, what I was saying that we can explore options, alternative modes of transit, like on-demand services that we have implemented since the pandemic, or micro transit opportunities as well. We've explored some pilot opportunities in the Irmo, Lake Carolina, and one other area I can't think of off the top of my head. But we're looking at different areas and trying to see what we can do to be more efficient in our approach. So this will be, I guess, a grand opportunity. If there was more of a 50-50 coverage concept, we can look into those and see if we can reduce the cost to provide service in some of these areas. But to the point that Scudder was making, there is a trade-off, and everything that we are doing here is operating off a fixed budget. So the goal, again, is to be as fiscally responsible as possible. And this is where the give and take comes from in order to stay within those parameters.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
May I just make one more point? And that is that our decision today really isn't a specific routes decision. It's the general percentages decision. And the board, as always, will always have the authority and the power to review individual route decisions as we develop the system or review the system that our consultants present us with the options. What I'm thinking of, for example, is that I'm less likely to think in all or nothing, although I take seriously what Mr. Wag has said. But for example, if I live in a rural area and I depend on the bus, or I live in a less densely populated area, I'll say that, and I depend on the bus, then it may be that the reduction might not be that the bus goes away altogether, but that it comes at less frequency. And what I may need to do is make the plans for meeting my medical appointments or my trips to the grocery store around the hours that bus service is available to me. In other words, I can't just say, well, I'd prefer to go at this time of day, so a bus needs to come here every 15 minutes, so I'll have that choice. I may need to make my plans around a less frequent route, but I'm also, I am reluctant to say that there would be, there'd be places where people just didn't have any way to get there. Now, we know that in some areas of our service area, where people live in very, less densely populated areas, and that population is never likely to want to ride a bus. I mean, those may be areas where we say it doesn't make sense to send a bus into, for example, an area of large farms where none of the people who own those farms are likely to ride a bus. I mean, or that work on those farms are likely to ride a bus. So I think I don't want us to get locked into thinking specific routes when we will always have the ability to say within the concept that we approve, we'll be making individual decisions as a board about about the route changes.
Understood. Very well. Point taken. Any other board members have any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think that Mr. Lawson brought up a good point. With the pandemic, I hope we are not looking at the data over 1 year. We need to look at the ridership over maybe, like he said, 3 years. And then I think also Mrs. Mood has a good point along with Mr. Burgess. So I think we should explore all of those.
Very good. Okay, from that point, based on my notes from Lawson, Smith, Mood, and Burgess mostly, and Morris, I like the motion, or not the motion, I like the plan that Mr. Lawson is stating. And let me reiterate from Ms. Gleading, I am not trying to be in a situation where we stop a route, i.e. 12. We're not into that kind of decision making to do that. And Ms. Gleading, I promise you, as the board chair, I will stand lock in step with you to make sure that does not happen. Now, as far as Mr. Lawson stating the frequency and looking at frequency versus ridership, I do think that is a very good concept. If it's not high ridership, then we don't increase the frequency. If we have density and frequency and have people standing, then we need to increase the frequency on those routes. So that's point well taken. Ms. Mood did iterate that, when it's time to look at changing a route, or the board has full authority over that. And I am at the point now where I would like for service standards and finance to really weigh into Mr. Eric Harris and Mr. Wag planning to ensure that we look at it from those points versus coverage and density, and making sure that we're not eradicating or diminishing service without a good plan, and board members can really weigh in on that. So, Mr. Lawson, I think you do have a idea of a motion, and if we do not have any other questions at this time, I would like to form this in an action item. But Mr. Lawson, would you please ensure that you, in this motion, that we do the addendum of making sure that our ridership goals and coverage goals are met, but then at the same time, we are sensitive towards any kind of diminishing of routes, and it has to go to full board before those concepts are even develop or even get out of the box. We want to make sure that we do not have a situation where we have panic in our community, because these people are the ones that voted for the penny, and we're going to ask them to vote for a penny in the future. And I just don't see us being able to be successful for a vote when we have basically diminished the service for the people that voted for the penny in the first place. So with that being said, Mr. Lawson, will you please move forward with the motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So I would like to make a motion that before we make whatever coverage we decide, or whatever concept, I'm sorry, that we decide, we vote as a board on the frequency of said concept. I'm sorry. Okay, let me start over. I'd like to make a motion that the board chooses a concept based on ridership, incline or decline, as it relates to frequency.
Mr. Lawson, could you amend that to give a period of time? I wouldn't want them just to look 1 year when the
Yes, sir.
pandemic had a major impact.
Yes, sir. So good point. So let me start over then. Okay. So I vote that my motion is that the board.
Wait just a second. Wait just a second. Any other board members want to give Mr. Lawson some input before he makes another motion? And I do like the percentages that you put out there, but then at the same time, I want it to be well understood that board members do have the authority to call special call meetings, especially if there is an issue that we need to adjust this plan. So,
Well,
any
Mr.
other?
Chairman,
Yes.
the conclusion I've come to from the service committee perspective just is that we need to be moving to more of a ridership focus, because we want to be able to get people to those jobs that are available. As we increase emphasis on the ridership model, we make more accessible the jobs that are available to the people who need them. I'm reluctant to go too far in that direction because I'm very sensitive to the upcoming vote for continued funding under the penny tax. So on the basis of that, my recommendation for Mr. Lawson's motion would be 60% ridership, 40% coverage.
Mr. Chairman, if I may. I apologize if I'm interrupting, Mr. Chairman. May I just say one thing with respect to these thoughts?
Yes, and I'm going to ask Mr. Harris also, and then I'm going to come back around to Mr. Fergus before we go to Mr. Lawson. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Wag.
Yes, so from what I've heard amongst your group, I hear a strong sentiment of a desire to try to maintain as much existing coverage as you have as possible, which would imply staying closer to the coverage concept, which is 50% ridership, 50% coverage, or as Ms. Mood suggested, 60-40 perhaps, if you want to turn that dial just a little bit, which might be possible with squeezing some efficiencies out of low frequency, low density areas with more on-demand services. So my impression from what I'm hearing from you all is you want to stay more on the coverage side of the model overall, which a 60-40 split would generally stay on close to what you have today. And so just make that decision with the understanding then that, of course, the ability to get much higher ridership will be limited, but that is obviously not your priority. And that is an absolutely reasonable thing to say, that your priority is trying to cover people, even if you're having to go to places where there's relatively low density, because your priority is, or at least 40% of your priority is trying to maintain coverage. The last thing I just want to say is, if you choose a 60-40 split, we will go and design a draft network, and we will come back to the public and we will come back to you with that to say, do we have this right? Have we missed something? Is there some really critical element we've missed? This is not your last word at all in this process. And this is not the last word that the public or stakeholders have in this process.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Harris, do you have any, before I go to Mr. Fergus?
I was just going to add that same thing. So yeah, we will have to take this out to public meeting. This will revisit we'll revisit and come back to the board and let you know the concepts based on your recommendation that we have come up with, and the routes that we're proposing to stay in or be compromised in some type of way. So it's not the last of this discussion, but again, I think Scudder said it best, just the compromise that you would be making within the 60-40 or 50-50 and so on and so forth. But again, I yield the floor back to the chairman.
Okay, well, one of the things I want to express more than anything else is that before you go out to the public, I would like for service and finance committees to know of what that articulations are going to be to the public, so they will be well aware. Because when the phones start ringing, they won't be calling Mr. Harris and Mr. Wag, they'll be calling the board members. Mr. Fergus.
Yes, I was wondering, Mr. Lawson had a motion on the floor, and you just need to include in his motion something about the coverage. He has the data in there and the requirements to get the data, and he need to include coverage in it simultaneously, because I keep hearing other percentages, and that wasn't the percentage in his motion.
Okay.
And then I have a motion after he can finish too.
Okay, you have a motion after we discuss the coverage and percentages?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Mr. Lawson, are you ready to frame that motion?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, very good. Please deliver your motion to the board.
Okay, board, I would like to make a motion that the board votes on the concept, the two concepts, and that is the ridership concept versus the coverage concept, with the caveat being that we're provided data for the ridership over the last 3 years, whether that's incline, increase in ridership or decrease in ridership.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, and just to be in a situation where I'm hearing, are we moving to a 60-40 concept?
It's my understanding that we needed to have some percentages in the motion.
Okay. So let me say this, Mr. Lawson. Let me say this, that we adopt the 60-40 concept with the understanding that the service committee may adjust certain individual routes, and then also I would like for the finance committee to weigh in on that adjustment too. So, and this is just a start. We're making sure that coverage is definitely in the plan. And like I said, when we need to revisit this, we can revisit, but I want us to move forward with a percentage today. So Mr. Lawson, please restate the motion.
Okay, and we're going with, just for the record, we're going with a 60-40.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, so I would like to make a motion.
Just one more question, just to make sure you're going with 60% coverage, and 60% ridership and 40% coverage.
Correct.
That was what I meant when I stated those percentages.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on that. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I might make a suggestion to help clarify things for folks, we provided on page 20 of your agenda packet, a draft policy resolution that includes just background of what we've done to this point, and then blank points to put in percentages. And it sounds like your preference is to put 60% ridership and 40% coverage in those blanks on that draft resolution, and then to perhaps add a second paragraph of some sort about providing some additional detail on historical ridership. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Lawson, let's not belabor. Let's go ahead and move forward. Can you articulate?
Yes, so I would like to make a motion that the board vote on the coverage concept in the form of a 60-40 split based on being provided 3-year ridership statistics.
Is there a second?
Second by
Second by Mr.
Robert.
Mars, Dr. Mars?
That's correct.
Okay, very good. Any other discussion?
Yes,
Ms. Battle Reed?
yes. My discussion,
Yes.
that his recommendation and motion is 60% coverage, not 60% ridership. Need to clarify that. We're hearing.
No,
two things.
the
No, it's-
coverage concept, those are two different concepts. It's a ridership concept and it's a coverage concept. The split is with the coverage concept, 60% ridership and 40% coverage under the coverage concept.
Very good. It's been motion and second. Any other questions? Ms. Bonner Reed, will you please call the roll? And let it be known, this is a process. This is something that we will revisit, and I'm asking Service Committee to make sure you keep your pulse on this concept to ensure that we're getting what we want. So with that being said, Ms. Bonner Reed, please call the roll.
Mr. Brennan?
Yes.
I'm sorry? What was your vote, Mr. Brennan? You're on mute.
It's a yes.
Thank you. Ms. Tracio? Mr. Overture Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson?
Pass.
Mr. Ferguson?
Pass.
Oh, thank you. Ms.
Was that a
Gleason?
yes? Was that a yes from Mr. Fergus?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
Ms. Gleason?
Yes.
Representative Howard?
Yes.
Chairman Huggins?
Yes.
Mr. Lawson?
Yes.
Ms. Mood?
Yes.
Dr. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Fergus, you had a motion.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that at the very next board meeting, we get an explanation as to how did we get here? Because something is being lost in translation. For the past 3 years, we've made close to 300 route changes. We're making a motion to use data. Where's the good data gonna come from? We can't get good data for a service meeting. So where's the good data gonna come from? So I'd like to make a motion that at the next board meeting, they get an explanation to the board as to how did we get into this concept of reimagining the comment.
Very good. Is there a second? Is
I
there a
second
second?
it.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been second by Ms. Gleading. Any other discussion on this motion? Please call the roll, Ms. Bono. Read.
Mr. Brennan?
Yes.
Ms. Tracio? Mr. Overture Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Fergus?
Yes.
Ms. Gleason?
Yes.
Representative Howard?
Yes.
Chairman Huggins?
Yes.
Mr. Lawson?
Yes.
Ms. Mood?
Yes.
Dr. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Smith? Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries.
Very good. That brings us to item number, update on Lucius Road. Mr. Harris.
Yes, again, thank you to the members of the board. We're prepared to issue the notice to proceed anytime now. We are just waiting on direction from SCDOT. They are making their best attempt to fast track the project of the installation of the traffic signal. So in short, we are doing everything we can to deliver the project on time and on budget, while making sure the quality of what we are constructing is pleasing to the community. Simple as
Thank you
that.
for your update, Mr. Harris. Any questions for Mr. Harris? Thank you, Mr. Harris. The next one is Mr. Smith and Ms. Andrews, fiscal year budget. And I believe Dr. Morris is also part of this update in motion. Mr. Smith.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Finance Committee, their last meeting undertook the task of reviewing the proposed budget for the next fiscal year. Ms. Andrews presented that to us, the changes year over year, in particular highlighting which areas are changing to the proposed budget. The committee had a chance to review everything and I think generally felt pretty comfortable with all the discussion and the changes. You know, some of the key areas that are changing include things like passenger fare. The expectation is that that will increase pretty significantly now that we've restored fare collection. There's been a significant change in the federal funding source, where once it was the CARES Act, it's now the Recovery Act, American Recovery Act, I believe, the portion of it that applies to transit. So those are key revenue changes and some other allocations among federal funding based on the types of capital that we will need next year. So those are the big changes on the revenue side, and there were some expense changes as well based on service changes and some salary compensation increase based on positions and that sort of thing. So the Finance Committee reviewed all that, made a positive recommendation to the board in concept, because we understood that there would be some minor changes from the time of the Finance Committee meeting until now. So our recommendation to you is approval of this budget for fiscal 22 as we understood it in concept, knowing that there will be those minor changes. So I will turn it over to Roz to explain fiscal year budget, and then maybe a brief discussion of what those minor changes have been since the Finance Committee met.
Hi, hopefully everyone can hear me okay. It's not much more to add from what Andy said. As he alluded, you have here in front of you your budget. Most of the changes are highlighted here. Significant ones that he mentioned were revenue changes in some of our revenue streams since the Finance Committee. And now I mentioned in the Finance Committee, we're meeting with Lexington County, I think within the next 2 weeks, to talk about their funding between them and the other municipalities we have. Again, we're adding a position next fiscal year to add an additional IT person, so we could eventually have a larger IT staff and an in-house IT person as opposed to a consultant. The hydrogen fuel you guys see here, it's kind of significantly higher than it was in the previous fiscal year, but that also may change. So like I said, it's here as a proposal for the next fiscal year. We tend to always do a mid-year review, trying to do a better way of managing where we're spending. Again, if you're looking at preventative maintenance, non and federal, I kind of combine the two of those. So that would equate for any PM that we do with the contractor, under the contract operator, where we get federal reimbursement and non-federal reimbursement. Let's see, just trying to point out anything else. So again, you have attachment A starting on page 74, to kind of highlight the same expenses that we did from previous fiscal year. We give you the proposed salaries for each employee, where the benefits for that lie, and also including Lexington County. That the next 2 pages are Lexington County's revenue split and the university services. So if you have any specific questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Ms. Andrews, I do appreciate all your hard work and your staff's hard work, and Mrs. Smith, I appreciate your leadership. With that being said, Mr. Smith, will you come to us with a motion?
Sure. I move that we adopt the proposed fiscal 22 budget as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second it, Robert Morris.
Dr. Morris, thank you for your second. Any discussion? I think at this time, Mr. Lawson did have a suggestion that we do one line item, and as far as security, Mr. Lawson, would you have a little discussion about that, please?
Yes, so board, at our last finance meeting, we had some discussions. And I know previously, a few board meetings ago, we discussed security as it currently is constructed. I have some serious concerns about our budget and how much we're spending on security. So I would like to make a motion at the appropriate time that the full board revisits as a line item our security and how we're spending it.
Mr.
Very
Lawson,
good. And
would you would you mind if I amended my motion to incorporate that?
Absolutely, Andy.
Okay, so I amend my motion to say that we adopt the fiscal year 22 budget as presented, with the understanding that we will review the security line item as part of interim mid-year budget review.
Very good. And I know, okay, and Mr. Morris, can I get you to second that?
I'll second it.
Very good. Any further discussion? Okay, before we call the roll, I do appreciate Mr. Lawson and Mr. Smith and Mr. Fergus. Ms. Fergus and I did have a brief visit, a couple of visits down at the Transfer Center at Central, Comet Central, and saw some things that we feel that we just need to look at. And I'm not short of saying that I would like to appoint an ad hoc committee that's across service and finance, just to look at the security item, but I will be forthcoming with that information in the future. Ms. Bonner-Reed, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, this is Will Brennan. Please consider, I'd like to be on that ad hoc. Appreciate it, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I will be in touch, and we'll be working with Mr. Deschamps to get the word out on the and Ms. Baker, Attorney Baker, just to make sure that we're following protocol to make sure that I pull this ad hoc committee in the right way together. Okay, thank you. Ms. Bonner-Reed, please call the roll.
Mr. Brennan?
Yes.
Mr. Riccio? Mr. Overture Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Fergus?
Yes.
Ms. Bleaton? Ms. Bleaton? You're on mute?
Yes.
Thank you. Representative Howard?
Yeah.
Chairman Huggins?
Yes.
Join the meeting.
Mr. Lawson?
Yes.
Ms. Mood?
Yes.
Dr. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you very much. That brings us to our next item, RATDev report. I would like to take an opportunity of personal sentiment to welcome Mr. Arnold LeGrand and Mr. Robert Smith, and also Mr. Maurice Bell. I'm actually going to yield some of my time to Mr. LeGrand, coming from Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth area. Is CEO of the RATDev, and I really want to appreciate him coming to spend some time with us today. I met with him earlier this morning and making sure that the commitment is where it's supposed to be on both sides of the comment and RATDev, and very good meeting. So if you would, Mr. LeGrand, please move forward, and I'm yielding some time of mine from the committee report. So please move forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to come in front of this board. As you said, I would like to to set a bit our commitment again, or to repeat our commitment. RATPDEV has engaged with the Comet 1 year ago when this O&M contract, operation and maintenance contract, was awarded. As always in such situation, RATPDEV has been committed to deliver high standard transit service, first through a proper mobilization to take over from the incumbent, and then to a day-to-day O&M activity. As you know, this ideal scenario did not exactly happen. However, despite of a very short mobilization, less than 45 days, RATPDEV and its local partners have run a smooth startup on July 1st last year, and I've always tried to deliver. You all perfectly know what kind of extraordinary difficulties, when I say extraordinary, I mean literally beyond what is ordinary, we have faced during the last 10 months, and you have made strong decisions to help to mitigate many of those difficulties, and I would like to acknowledge it today, and I would like to thank you for this. I'm not saying that there is no more difficulties, and we know that we are not perfect, that we have to do some part of the job. As every organization, we have opportunities to progress, and we really value your feedback. However, now what I can feel, I'm of the opinion that we have a much more favorable condition for a partnership, and really this partnership is key in this business. We have to work together to make sure that you receive the service that you expect, and also that we are always able to deliver it. I can feel now a good spirit of mutual cooperation, and let's be clear, cooperation doesn't mean that you are not anymore the client. You are, and you will always be the person or the entity that has the final decision. However, we want to work closely with you and with your team on the day-to-day operation strategies, as well as the medium to long-term strategies as fleet management and renewal, software and innovation, to accompany you to make the best decision that will ultimately enhance the service to the community. That being said, I would like to share some of my commitments. First commitment is around the recruitment. There is different level. I'm going to start with the operator level. You know, it's a challenge to recruit operators for the moment in the entire country. So similarly here in Colombia, we had a couple of months ago or weeks ago, we had more than 20 operator vacant positions. However, with the support of our corporate HR team, the local team has already launched a solid action plan that mainly consists in developing diverse sourcing ways in parallel instead of one or two. And it works. So far, we have already recruited 13 operators who are finishing their training, and there is another set of 7 to be completed before the end of June. So I'm happy to say that today I can confirm you that we will reach full manpower for operators end of June. So that's the first commitment relative to the operators. Now talking about the management. As you may know, I mean, Maurice has accepted to be our interim GM, and he made an amazing job, and that really helped us to take us where we are. But we need now. Sorry,
join the meeting.
We now need stability in the management, so we are actively selecting a GM. And I don't want just a GM. I want to select a GM who will really stay first here, and that will be part of this community also. It will be the 4th GM in a bit less than 14 months, so it's too much. As I said, we need now to have stability. However, I also want to select a GM that you are going to like, a GM that will be part of those meetings, that will really interact with you, and a GM who will be also, of course, highly capable to manage such operation at the standard you want to set it. So we will be in a position to introduce the selected candidate at the end of June for this position. Then the rest of the permanent key role that still needs to be appointed will come just after. Obviously, we would like to get first the leader, we would like to get first the GM to make sure that he can really build the team that he would like to get. So we have already identified some candidates, but we need to have the GM first to make this final recruitment. And so this other permanent key role will be selected in the course of the summer, July or August. So that's the commitment on the recruitment and then the staffing. Then I've got another commitment that may be obvious, but it's good to state it again. As I said earlier, we are looking for a long-term collaboration with the Comet. And we know that our local expertise, combined with our national and worldwide expertise in transit, could be very useful to your team to accomplish their mission. For this reason, I would like to take this opportunity to state in front of Mr. Deschamps and in front of all of you that RATP is really committed to support you in many activities, even if they are not directly in our scope of work, such as scheduling, marketing, communication, or technology. And I think technology illustrates perfectly where our two respective scopes meet. Indeed, one of our key difficulty today is the software solution for transit that does not really provide us with the expected standard or does not fill our respective needs in terms of data collection and restitution and also of operation management. But by working together with your team, we quickly came to the conclusion that our network and our partners that we have already tested in other contexts can assist. So we have decided, and I took that decision to take on our own a technology assessment that this provider, who is based in the Southern East region, can start very early in June, so in the coming weeks, upon your agreement in principle. This assessment will give you a precise review of the different solutions that could be implemented to satisfy your needs. And of course, if you're happy with this approach, to consult with us also to check whether or not they also satisfy us, because we need to be aligned on the solution to make sure that it's a success. Then you will be able to make your own decision, of course, that I hope will allow us to really measure and monitor precisely our performances and to take this system to the best-in-class level. Then my last commitment is about the community engagement. We have been very focused on the day-to-day operation, on the staffing issue, on the technology issue. We would like now really to take this role that was supposed to be the role that we should have looked at from day one is the community engagement. There's different pillars that we have identified with you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your input around the economic development, around the education, around healthcare access, and we have different proposals that are going to be discussed very soon. And we would like really a local team with the support of the corporate to really assist and push this community engagement. So that our commitment for our community engagement, sorry, for the coming months. And I hope to have another opportunity to give you some feedback a bit later in the year or early next year. I don't know if Robert, you want to add something. Or...
Thank you, Mr. LeGrand. And I want to tell you, I do appreciate working with Mr. Smith and how he's worked with Mr. Deschamps and his staff over the last month or so, just to make sure that we get further down the road and delivering a successful product for Columbia and Lexington. So with that being said, any other questions for Mr. Smith or Mr. LeGrand from the board members? Any questions? Thank you, Mr. LeGrand. Hope you have safe travels, Mr. Smith. Mr. Bell, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a question about that tracking system that was supposed to be put on the buses so we can know where the buses are and when they're going to reach the bus stops. Has that been put in place yet?
Yes. That's the
Mr. Smith.
This is Robert Smith. Yes, those new tracking devices were installed on the buses and they're on 100%. And we're now running it through a pilot program that was a part of the process that we needed to go through. And the new service is strategic mapping that we put on the buses. And in addition to that, we're working with the COMET to provide additional opportunity to look at our running time. So some of the items you were talking about earlier in terms of knowing how the riders are using the bus, whether the bus is actually tied back and giving the right data as far as the schedule is concerned, we'll be able to work with Mrs. Mood and with Mr. Fergus on the service committee to give regular updates on that. So good question, and that is moving forward.
And do I have access to it on my phone yet?
I'm sorry?
Do I have access to that strategic mapping system on my iPad or phone?
I believe that there will be a more specific update given in the executive committee today by the consultant. that's working through that process, and Mr. Leroy, the champs, they'll be giving a more specific update on the timing. Our involvement in that is helping to train the drivers, work with them and partner with them to get it on board and help adjust the running times to make sure that the schedule, which would tie back to your phone, and the actual delivery and tracking of the buses all work together. So that will be rolled out relatively soon, but I don't want to get ahead of the consultant that's giving an update here in a bit.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions from board members? Thank you, Ratdale, for that report. That brings us to item number 7, motion period. Mr. Deschamps, there should not be any motions at this time for motion period. Is that correct, Mr. Deschamps?
Right, Mr. Chair.
Okay, very good. And that brings us to progress reports. I am yielding my time on progress reports. The chair report, basically thanking everyone for their commitment to make sure that we move in the positive direction. And also, if you miss, I believe it's committee chair reports, COVID. There is no intermodal report at this time because we are still working through a couple of sites, and I will be forthcoming at our next board meeting to talk about additional sites that board members want us to take a look at. So with that being said, COVID, Mr. Deschamps, do you have any update with COVID committee, please?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Just that we're still under our COVID-19 policy and also following TSA mask requirements, which was extended through September 13th. Masks are still required on public transportation. We're still offering vaccination and testing down at Comet Central. The new hours are Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. till 12 noon, and then from 2 to 6 p.m. And also, too, we're looking at ways that we can increase the number of employees on vaccination. So we're looking at possibly what other employers are doing and also other transit agencies. So we'll have that information to report at our next COVID-19 meeting. That's the end of my report.
Thank you. Ms. Mood with service. Is there any questions for Mr. Deschamps on COVID first? Okay, Ms. Mood.
I just want to report that Mr. Ferguson, we met with the chairman and with RAPDEV and Comet representatives and had a very productive discussion on the key performance indicator of on-time performance. We learned a lot about the factors that enter into that extend beyond the technology. And at the next service committee meeting, we'll be giving the full committee that overview of information. So you'll hear from us again on that at the next board meeting.
Thank you. Any questions on Ms. Mood? Mr. Smith, Finance.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The Finance Committee spent most of our time and effort on the budget, which we've already, of course, addressed and passed. We did have our normal updates on current year financial performance and DBE, progress towards DBE goals, and so just kind of had a normal meeting. Nothing, unusual to report.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Smith? Thank you, Mr. Smith. And as far as the executive committee, just want to reiterate that the executive committee working very hard with other board members to ensure that we serve our public the way we have been. And I do appreciate the executive committee stepping up and making sure that we do that. That brings us to the interim update of Mr. Deschamps. Do you have anything to report, Mr. Deschamps?
Yes, sir. Just want to refer everybody to the department report on pages 79 through 85, but also too, just from a staffing update, we'd like to inform the board and to welcome Angela Jacobs to our staff. She's our public information specialist and clerk of the board. She officially joined us this past month. We welcome her aboard, and she's been a great asset so far. Also, too, we've been actively recruiting for our other positions. We've also made a job offer for the procurement specialist position, so hopefully we'll be hearing back on that, hopefully by the end of this week. And we're also actively recruiting for the planning and development specialist position also. That's the end of my report.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Bonner Reed, Community Outreach.
Mr. Chair, I yield my time and ask the board to just refer to my written report, if that's okay.
That sounds good. Mr. Fergus, I know you and I have asked Ms. Bonner Reed to ensure that we work with Ms. Geraldine Robinson to try and get a vaccinated center down in Lower Richland, and that's something that Ms. Bonner Reed is still actively doing. So I do appreciate that, Mr. Fergus. Any review board motions? Any review of board motions needed at this time?
None at this time, Mr. Chair.
Okay, very good. That brings us to executive session. Is there a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Second.
There's a second.
Yes, second from Mr. Lawson.
Okay, very good. Motion to go into open session.
I so move.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? Ms. Reed, please call the roll.
Mr. Brennan? Mr. Brennan? Ms. Teresa? Mr. Overture Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Fergus?
Yes.
Ms. Gleason?
Yes.
Representative Howard? Chairman Huggins?
Yes.
Mr. Lawson?
Yes.
Ms. Mood?
Yes.
Dr. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Very good. We're now in open session. Ms. Mood, is there a motion from?
Yes. I move that the board authorize Mr. Tyson to complete the settlement agreement as discussed in the executive session.
Is there a second?
Second.
Connect.
Ms. Reed, will you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mr. Brennan? Ms. Teresa? Mr. Overture Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Fergus? Mr. Fergus? Ms. Gleason?
Yes.
Representative Howard? Chairman Huggins?
Yes.
Mr. Lawson?
Yes.
Ms. Mood?
Yes.
Dr. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Very good. Thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Mr. Lawson.
All right. Very good. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Everyone have a safe afternoon and thank you for your time.